Jackson State won the SWAC game of the year over FAMU because their defense was dominant and they won the two biggest matchups of the game. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. It's all about the SWAC game of the year. With a game like this, you have to come out on Monday and fill out the episode, and it honestly wasn't that difficult. We'll wrap up today's episode with a look at the remaining schedules for Jackson State and FAMU, because that's a big conversation coming out of this in segment two, excuse me. We'll take a look at Jackson State's offense. I think that the way the game felt, it's not exactly indicative of how well that unit actually played. But the unit you're not questioning is the Jackson State defense, because they were absolutely dominant. Jackson State, I salute your defense. I salute the defense like a man in fatigues on Veterans Day, because they put in the absolute best performance that they could have with what was given to them. I know that they had a couple of shot plays. FAMU had a couple of shot plays that were big, but outside of that, they didn't do too much offensively. Jackson State had a 30-yard touchdown to Jamari Gassett, had a 70-yard touchdown to Ace Cobb, but outside of that, they only had two drives the rest of the game that went over 30 yards. It was honestly, we do our player of the game. The reason I didn't post it online immediately is because I really wanted to give the whole defense the player of the game, but I can't do that. I wanted to do it, but I can't do that. And I didn't feel right picking one person out, so I ended up going with an offensive player. I think it'll be probably pretty easy to guess who that offensive player is, but we'll unveil that in segment two. But defensively, you had a guy like Reed Pulliam, True Thompson. These guys made the two biggest plays of the game. But then you look at the leading tacklers in the trenches. The top three leading tacklers were all defensive linemen. When that is the case, that tells you just how dominant that front unit is, because that means no one's getting past them, right? I never want my safety to be my leading tackler. If I do have that, either he's a safety who plays in the box all the time, or I'm failing as a defense, because that means you're getting to the third level frequently. Yeah, sometimes he might come down and make a 5-yard stop. He might make even then I'm not really happy about it. But he may make some tackles in the after the catch, right? Like, those things happen. But if my safety is consistently my leading tackler, that means something is wrong with my defense, or I'm playing him up close, think a Jamal Adams, a Budda Baker type of guy. That's not the case here. When your defensive line is your leading tackler, your top three leading tacklers, that means no one's getting past that first level. And that's a very good example of a strong defense. That's a very good stat that'll show you just how dominant that defense is, or as I prefer to say, it's confirmation of it, right? Because when you watch the game and you go back and you look at the stats, you really want confirmation that what you saw actually happened. Sometimes you feel like, man, this guy was all over the field. He had 3 catches for 39 yards. That's not all over the field. He wasn't dominating, right? Like those things are typically indicative of how the game goes, but you got to trust your eyes first and then back it up with the numbers. With Jackson State, the highlight matchup was Jamari Gassett versus the JSU secondary. And for me, I always said I would tell them someone else needs to beat me. I'm not letting Jamari Gassett tear up my secondary. And honestly, even if you expand it to Jackson State secondary versus FAMU's wide receivers, they did a really good job. Remember this: the critical matchup for Jackson State's defense was stopping FAMU's passing game, and I think they did that outside of a couple of deep shots. Outside of a couple of deep shots, I don't. And you look at Gassett. Gassett had a 34-yard touchdown. The rest of the game, he had a 6-yard catch until the final drive. Outside of that 34-yard touchdown, he had a 6-yard catch until the final drive of the game, and he had 2 double-digit catches that make his numbers look a little bit more favorable. I think he ended with 4 for 64, which does look pretty good, but the truth is he wasn't a factor in this game for the majority of it. I'm talking about until the game was pretty much closed out. He was not a factor in this game. Right? That's what you needed to do. Ace Kyle got himself a deep shot, got himself another touchdown. We'll probably address that on Wednesday's episode as we go around the HBCUs. I want to look at FAMU finding another receiving threat because I do think that's one good thing that came out of this. But FAMU forced 4 turnovers. Their defense. FAMU defense forced 4 turnovers and got 7 points out of it. Jackson State forced 3 turnovers and they scored a touchdown on their own, and then they set up their offense for another. There was a period within this game. There was a period within this game where it felt like something had to break. Either FAMU had to get something going because they were absolutely stagnant, or Jackson State had to figure out how to finish drives because they weren't doing that well either in the third quarter. I guess neither one really had to happen. Instead, Jackson State said, we're going to force a turnover and we're going to put points on the board ourselves, take it out of your hands. We're going to score. We ain't going to even give you the chance to fumble the ball back, throw an interception back, because Jackson State was doing that in the third quarter. They said, you know what? True Thompson had one of the most, honestly, True Thompson and Reed Pulliam had 2 of the most beautiful fumbles, forced fumbles that I've seen in a long time. So when you see a defensive lineman force a fumble on a quarterback, typically he's going around the edge and he's swatting the ball, right? Or he's catching him off the blind side. True Thompson ran straight up the middle, hit Daniel Richardson in his chest, and forced the ball out. As a former defensive player, I absolutely loved it. Then you return that for a touchdown. The next play that they come back, Daniel Richardson gets the ball off. He throws it to a wide receiver, and Reed Pulliam puts his helmet right on the ball, and I'm talking about textbook. That is textbook. I loved watching those 2 plays from a defensive mindset. Jackson State was the better team here. Jackson State was the better team. They stopped FAMU's offense. And I'll say this. This is something that I do really want to say because I think it's important. And as we look at the configuration of the SWAC, as we look at how everything's going to play out, you can't help but compare Alabama State, FAMU, and Jackson State. I don't think there's anybody else you compare to. And you may say, why can you bring Alabama State into it? Their defense is just too good. I think that they could beat anybody, but confidence wavers, right? But like, I have to include them in the mix because they were also here. I've noticed this. FAMU's offense ain't great. I think it's good. I even think it's really good. But over the last 2 weeks, I've seen them play elite defenses in Jackson State and Alabama State, and I haven't been impressed. This game shared a lot of similarities to the Alabama State game for the Rattlers, right? You had a couple of big plays, a couple of shot plays. Outside of that, you didn't really string together too much consistent offense. You might have sprinkled a little bit of plays here and there. Your opponent missed a couple of field goals, but most importantly, your offense wasn't able to really get going. But here's the difference, right? See, I walked away unimpressed with their performance. But if you ever seen this clip of George St. Pierre, he walks into the octagon and he tells the champion, I was not impressed with your performance. This is so funny because I think it's a direct parallel to how you look at Jackson State. Jackson State probably Jackson State probably wasn't impressed with that performance either. And you know what they said? Yeah, you did that in that game, but your offense didn't look great. And one thing we have that Alabama State didn't have is an offense. So we can come out and we can score points. And that's exactly what happened. The difference between FAMU versus Alabama State and FAMU versus Jackson State is the Rattlers ran into a really good defense, but then they ran into a really good offense. And despite a lot of the errors that the Jackson State offense had, it wasn't enough for you to say, yeah, FAMU's going to come out with this victory. It was very close. It was very close. And ultimately, the Jackson State defense had to make the biggest play. But I don't even think Alabama State is in that game. That's the biggest difference. But FAMU's offense is not great. I think they're good and really good. But overall, Jackson State's a bad matchup. It goes beyond the defense, so allow me to go beyond the defense. Jackson State offense was on point. The only thing that disrupted them was the fact that they couldn't stop turning the ball over. But I want to tell you why that performance was better than you may think it was while you were watching that game. Today's episode is brought to you by Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking, and here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into this toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's the blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel the best tomorrow. So first step, drink your pre-alcohol before you go out there and hit the town, right? You want to do that. Drink responsibly, because if you go out there and you act a fool, it's not going to save you. You still have to be responsible. So hydrate yourself, get a good night's sleep if you can. I know often that's not tied to drinking. And then enjoy tomorrow because you're going to wake up feeling refreshed. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed by all of the scientists and is backed with 100% guaranteed on your money. So go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for 15% off. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On SEC. I told you, Georgia versus Texas was the game of the week, and it was a big deal in the SEC, so go check out my brother's show, Locked On SEC. Now let's continue rolling with our game of the week. And honestly, I don't think that this disappointed at all. I got everything that I wanted out of this game. Jackson State versus FAMU, and the Tigers took the game because they won the two biggest matchups. We looked at Jamari Gassett versus the Jackson State secondary and how they won that matchup. Gassett was a non-factor. But one thing that I think doesn't really get looked at is Jackson State's offense was really rolling, but they have 4 turnovers. Overall, I don't think I would say this was an average performance. I don't think I would say it was good. I definitely wouldn't say it was great, but I would say it was an average performance simply because you turned over the ball. But I think it was looked at as a really poor performance, and I think the fact that Jackson State had 4 turnovers in this game makes you forget just how good the offense was. It's not like FAMU was stopping them outside of the turnovers. You have to give credit to that. One thing I won't do is come in here and make excuses and be like, well, if Jackson State, da-da-da-da. But the truth of the matter is, if Jackson State does a better job protecting the football, and a lot of these were good plays on FAMU, we'll get to that in a second. If Jackson State just executes better, this is a 40-50 point game. And I need that to be recognized, right? I need us to look at the fact that when you're evaluating what Jackson State is, you may say, oh, well, the offense struggled against FAMU. Kind of. They didn't struggle to move the ball. They did that pretty easily. They didn't struggle to generate offense. That's not true. What happened is they turned over the ball. We've seen that against Grambling. Now we've seen it against FAMU. That is concerning. That right there is something to be concerned about. But let's not say that the offense itself struggled. No. And I also won't say that they shot themselves in the foot. FAMU's defense made a lot of good plays. Outside of the first Jacobian Morgan fumble where he was really loosey-goosey running away with the football down in one hand and a paw, trying to not really paying attention. I felt like that was kind of on Morgan. But outside of that, FAMU was making plays. That fumble by the running back, I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been Terrell. I think it was either Terrell or it was a wide receiver who was rushing on a trick play. But that got punched out, and that was a really good play by FAMU. You're looking at that interception by Bowler. That was a really good play, and Bowler had a really good pass breakup, or was it a tackle? He had a really good game. He had a really good second, third quarter when you popped out, and you don't really want to see your cornerback that much. But when he's making standout interceptions, the way that Kendall Bowler was, FAMU defense did a really good job of forcing turnovers. This cannot be chalked up to Jackson State solely. I know we like to do that. Oh, we just messed up. No, I'm not calling these unforced errors. These were forced errors. Some of them weren't good decisions, but FAMU was making plays to generate this offense. They weren't just beneficiaries of screw ups on Jackson State's part. I will not do that. And while the turnovers are a part of the game, evaluating that, let's just take that away for a second. But the turnovers are the reason that they didn't have a good game. So I'm not taking them away from my evaluation. But for the moment, let's strip that away. Jackson State's offense is rolling in this game. If Jackson State hits their 2 field goals that they missed, this is a 41-point game by them. If Jackson State keeps the ball in their hands, they may hit 45, 50 points. Like Jackson State's offense, when you're looking at them as we go down the road, we need to appreciate just how good that Jackson State's offense really is. Because 3 out of the 4, right? Jackson State's offense was moving, but the turnovers make you feel differently. The turnovers make you feel like they weren't really doing what they were doing. 3 out of the 4 turnovers that Jackson State suffered were in FAMU territory. One of them was at the 50-yard line, literally midfield. Jackson State's offense was rolling. They hit a point when the punter came out one time. The Jackson State punter punted once. The field goal unit wasn't great. They missed 2 field goals on the day. That was a big problem too. Right? Like I was listening to Jay Walker and he was talking about how Jackson State's going to regret this, that, and the third if they lose this game because of how it started at the beginning.